Good morning, Mr. Co-Chairs, esteemed committee members. It's good to be with you today in person. For the record, Brianna January with Chamber of Progress in respectful opposition to SB 1295. Chamber of Progress is a tech industry coalition advocating for the progressive future of tech and inclusive access to that future. Online safety is one of our top priorities, and we support SB 1295's inclusion of an online safety center, which will provide critical resources to combat cyberbullying and promote mental health awareness for young users. However, we do believe that the bill is not the appropriate approach for the Commonwealth and would inadvertently compromise online privacy, prohibit online services from offering teens healthy content and algorithmically curated feeds, and disproportionately harm Connecticut's most at-risk youth in doing so. Committee, here's why. While we appreciate the bill's use of the actual knowledge standard, SB 1295, as drafted, amounts to a de facto age verification requirement for all users, not just minors. And it does so by the way of parental consent, restrictions on data processing, and restrictions on messaging. This would be a tremendous encroachment of individual privacy. I don't know about you committee members, but I personally do not want to have to upload my driver's license just to scroll Facebook and see what my high school classmates are up to. In fact, estimating the age of a user will require more data, contrary to the data minimization efforts of the Connecticut Data Privacy Act. And many adult users, just like myself, would reasonably prefer not to share their private identifying information with platforms, creating the unpleasant dilemma of whether or not to turn over your personal sensitive data to access what is protected online speech or to forgo access to those services altogether. Alternatively, we could also see under this bill platforms, instead of attempting age verification, they might just opt to treat all users as de facto minors due to the compliance requirements. And committee, you have heard me say before that we also have concerns around age verification and cybersecurity. There are very few companies that actually perform age verification currently, and those that do have really horrendous records when it comes to keeping that personal data safe. I'll also note that SB 1295 mandates the platforms obtain verifiable parental consent for social media features and interactions. Committee, social media platforms already provide parental tools should guardians seek to use them. Mandating consent requirements can inadvertently become tools of control in abusive households. This is a particular risk for Connecticut's LGBTQ youth in unsupportive households. And lastly, again, while well-intentioned, SB 1295 in practice would actually promote toxic posts over healthy, safe content, having the direct opposite effect of what the bill intends to do. This committee, again, has heard me say algorithms actually play a very critical role in identifying and removing and blocking unwanted and targeted interactions. Thank you, and I look forward to working with the committee.
Thank you, Brianna, for your testimony. Again, I think you're 3 for 3 joining us so far this session. I appreciate your consistency.
More to come, I'm sure.
I'm certain of it. I have a few questions. One, I'm continually perplexed by the argument that because there are some positive attributes associated with certain children being able to access support groups, or there's some positive aspects of algorithms being able to block some forms of damaging content, we need to let the whole thing go, right? Like in the 50s and 60s, there's this argument, a pro-kids smoking argument, in which it said, parents should be supportive of their kids smoking because it's a sign that their children are maturing. And it will open up the door for parents to have continued conversations with their children and guide them to be like how to be like more open with their parents about other risky behaviors. And if you allow them to engage in this one relatively mild risky behavior, it'll establish a working relationship between parents and children. Now, clearly, 50 years later, we recognize that as an absurd argument in support of children smoking. But it kind of sings true to this argument that we've got to expose children to all of the awful things that we're fully aware of that are being studied in like science journals and health journals by some of the digital and social media partners themselves, like the creators of this, saying there's a lot of really negative content out there that is being targeted towards children. So I struggle with the argument that, yeah, we recognize it, but all of your attempts just don't pass muster. We don't like any of what you would seek to do. Instead, we'd like you to not regulate us at all and let us figure it out. Like I'm really at I'm really at odds with that argument. And I feel like the lack of substantive, structured engagement on this issue is forcing us to do things that social media companies don't like. But frankly, I don't want to hear for the next 30 years why letting a kid smoke is a good choice, right? Like, it just seems like that argument, the arguments against us regulating this in some meaningful way are no longer useful engagement on a public policy matter. And so I'd just like to have your sort of response to that.
Sure. Thank you for that. And we completely agree that there is a lot of harmful content that is available online. That's the world that we live in right now.
Hold on, not just available, specifically targeted towards children.
Sure. I'm sure that there is harmful content specifically targeted towards children. A few things. For background, our partners do not have a voter veto in our positions. We lead from our center-left values as a staff at Chamber of Progress. We actually do not have any partners that work in the social media space outside of Google, who is the parent company of YouTube, which is not exactly the platform that this bill would target. That said, we agree that there needs to be guardrails. We agree that there needs to be a lot of education around online safety, a lot of education around digital literacy. However, we can't restrict access to the internet. We can't restrict access to information, to resources. Completely agree that we have to weigh the balance between the access for some specific community members might be stronger than the need and access for the greater group. Understood. That said, when you do restrict access for folks like queer kids or, for example, immigrant children who use social media as a way to remain connected to family, to culture, to tradition online, it's those folks that are going to be harmed the deepest. It's those folks who quite literally use these services for good or bad in some ways to connect to resources, to community, to Lifeline, to, we've even heard from national advocates like the Trevor Project, which is the leading anti-LGBTQ suicide prevention group for youth, say that bills like this could actually restrict access to their 911 equivalent helpline for queer kids that are considering self-harm and suicide, unfortunately, just because there is an element of restricted access to information. For us, it's really about the algorithmic aspect. It's about forcing feeds to be chronological. If you could imagine the situation in which a kid is unfortunately bullied at school, they come home, they want to just decompress, connect online to their friends, that the community support that they have, instead of opening up Instagram and seeing posts that relate to their interests and things that they want to engage with, they're forced to see posts in a chronological feed in which the students that they just left school from that bullied them in person are now posting one by one, bullying them online because it's chronological.
That is, to me, a greater indicator of the obligations that the social media companies have to prevent that material from ever ending up there in the first place.
1000%
I don't think it's an
agreed.
argument against us having limits and controls in place regarding the algorithmic control of look what's targeted towards children. In fact, like, if AI was really this, if the algorithms were really as advanced as we purport them to be and getting the right content to the right children, it would have highlighted those very specific things and prevented them from being targeted as our children. Like, to me, like, we're in a new vanguard of what the relationship should be and the consideration should be and how we regulate this industry. And it's been a bipartisan consideration across the country on how best to do this. And I just don't think the arguments that we can't do anything and ultimately the technology will figure it out, I just don't think it passes muster anymore. And like, I get it that there are trade-offs, and then like look, my constituents, when I go back to New Haven, are the very ones that you purport to be the most concerned about not having access to the support services they need. That is my constituency in a nutshell. And I am concerned about that too, but I do think that there are some relevant controls that we all need to put in place because it's just gotten out of hand. And yeah, there are trade-offs, right? Like, is it a violation of privacy that I have to show my license to buy alcohol or to get served at a restaurant? I guess maybe it is, but I'm willing to make that trade because I know the damages that are likely to occur if we don't have forced ID checks. at a restaurant for someone who like looks like they're 25 or 30 and turns out they're 17 or 18, right? Like we all make these trade-offs at the end of the day. And we like maybe you might disagree, but generally we do them because we think the public good is advanced in a greater detriment. So I think that's the challenge that we're going to confront. And frankly, I'd prefer, and I'm going to turn it over to Senator Maroney, I'd prefer a greater level of engagement at this point in time in helping us craft reasonable legislation and solutions, because absent that, like that, I don't like the head in the sand approach is not going to work. And like legislatures across the country are going to step into this vacuum, and we're going to put regulations in place because we're seeing the impact that it's having on all of our children. And you're talking to a bunch of legislators here who almost all of us have children and grandchildren, and we're seeing on a daily basis a different experience than you're indicating. And so I think that's where the concern is. Senator Maroney.
Thank you. And Brianna, you have to point to me where in the bill we deal with algorithmic feeds.
I don't have the bill language directly in front of me to give you a page and line. Unfortunately, I'll have to point that out directly, but I'd be happy to work with you on that. And I'll just note that on the identification piece, I think that the difference, obviously there's balances. We all agree, yes, we should show our ID to do things like purchase alcohol. The difference is that a restaurant doesn't hold on to that, right? They don't take a copy of your ID and hold on to it for the next time you're in the bar. A social media platform holding on to a copy of your ID or proof that you are someone's parent or guardian is a bit more concerning. It opens up a lot of cybersecurity issues.
Right. Well, thank you. I would like to point, back to the age verification. You mentioned it here. That's actually the age verification standard that was in our bill that was passed in 2022. That's been lost since July 1 of 2023. It's the same knowledge it's the same knowledge standard that's in the majority of the 20 states that have privacy bills. So there are standards I know that have been found unconstitutional, right, when they looked at the AADC and others. Parental controls, here we just require, that's also existing law, right, to as of October 1 of 2024 to provide tools to prevent an unconnected adult from contacting a minor that they're not friends with or have an existing relationship with. The only change here is to make that a default setting of on, right? And so that's an existing law. Our children's privacy law was not sued. Like, I do understand that the Texas Scope Act, there was a decision on that. They did find, though, in the Texas Scope Act, when the decision was that verifiable parental consent does make constitutional muster. I know the other issues of age verification they found, and void for vagueness in some of the areas. So I think a lot of your testimony was towards the previous bill and not towards the bill at hand. And again, we all want to work together and look for feedback. I do know that there are issues based on some of the court decisions in terms of the void for vagueness on the impact assessments, in looking at maybe stating mental health is too broad. We do need to be more specific in the harms we're looking for. But I just want to point out that all we ask in this bill is that you do an assessment to look at if you're creating a heightened risk of harm to minors. And if you do, then you have to put in place a plan to mitigate those. And again, also looking at previous court, we didn't understanding the prior restraint. Again, we've looked carefully to make sure we've addressed all the constitutional challenges. If you see issues, please bring them to us. We do look forward to working with you, but most of your testimony today was not applicable, to the bill or its existing law, right? And so it's been in effect in Connecticut, right? The changes are very minor in this bill.
Sure. I think that our concern is more so that the bill would expand that and then open up the state to risks that we've shared.
Okay, great. Thank you.